And now that I'm already done mostly with the other parts of the model, I'm gonna start sticking some things together. Then it was time to work on his skin tones, and basically I came back in with a little bit of washes and I just kind of darkened some stuff up, added a little bit more life to the skin, and I worked on the highlights and shadows on that skin. Working on the eyes, I did the usual of placing black into the socket first, and then came back with a little bit of a purplish kind of color and sprayed that over the eyes themselves, a little bit over the cheeks with some lighter pinks. And then painted her eyebrows with the same brown that I painted her hair with. Once that had dried, I worked on her eyes again, and this time I'm going to use highlight skin color, which is from Fairy Flesh set, and I'm going to paint the eyes white. I know it makes you angry, I don't care. Then I'm going to use another Warhammer's technique, and I'm going to put some decal set on and stick some decals in these eyes. Yes, I did decals. It is heretical. You should not be doing this. Only a real painter would only paint them with their hands and not use decals. I don't care, bruh. It looks better. It looks nice. It was something I wanted to test. And yes, I printed these decals myself and cut those tiny circles out with the most awkwardest pair of scissors you could ever use in your life. Once I was done with the face, I went back in with a matte clear and I painted this over just the skin. Once the skin was dry, I then painted a gloss over the lips and the eyes themselves. On her hands, you can tell that there are meant to be a couple of red spots, which is part of her suit coloring. And in order to make this look like red, the easiest way you can do this is by painting them white again. I just used that highlight skin tone, and once I'd done 2, maybe 3 layers over the top of it, I painted the contrast bile red just straight over the top, and it just works. It's just magic. Just trust the process. It always works. In order to highlight those, I used a little bit of the orange from the contrast series and I just sloshed that over the top. There wasn't really much thought to this, I just did it kind of haphazardly. And then I used that red that I was using for the lines in her suit all over the fingers. And pretty much that's where I called this model done. Hopefully you taken something out of this video that's gonna help you make your own models in the future. My whole aim with this channel is just to give people the tools that they need to be able to make these models look like not poo. Now of course, you can have your own opinions and you can do things however you want, but if you want to do something that looks really cool and you have no idea how to do it and you picked up some information out of this video, then you probably would like to support me, and the best way you can support me is by watching the next video, of course, and sharing that with your gran. But if you want to support me even further and make sure that I'm able to keep the lights blinding my eyeballs, then you can look at my Patreon. Patreon is a place where you can support artists and the work that they do. If the work that I do helps you, maybe you want to support me. Of course, there are multiple tiers and you can support at any level you would like. All of the support gets you access to our secret, super private, awesome investors Discord upon the internet, and certain tiers give you access to videos and other content as it comes, when it comes. Of course, I'd like to say a super special thank you to my patrons right now. And we got a couple new patrons this week that I would like to thank as well. Christoph Lenz, Thomas Strander Hansen, Ivan Lehmer, and Harry Geek. Thank you, my dudes. It's because of your support that I'm able to keep these lights, blinding my eyeballs, and make more videos for you guys to watch. We are at the part of the video where I get to say my favorite thing. And this is, if you don't like anything that you saw in this video, you probably should go off. I'm gonna go paint more spiders now, because spiders are the best thing to paint ever. You can't convince me any differently. This is Ground Affected, and if you want to know who I am, ask your mom. In this video, I'm going to be painting another Spider-Man. Why don't I do this for every video? Here's my freaking thumbnail. This video was sponsored by CA 3D Studios, and if you really want to get some of the most amazing sculpts, you want to check out their Patreon. There will be a link for them in the description below. CA 3D Studios is a company that makes a bunch of sculpts every month. You get 6 STLs every month when you subscribe to their STL tier that you get 6 STLs from. I don't know, just know that you get some amazing sculpts, and honestly they really think about the artists who are going to be making and painting these things, because they put the cuts in the best of places. And for that I must very much thank you, CA 3D Studios, because it is a gracious thing of you to do this, and I appreciate that. Now let me just cut the waffle and let's get into how I painted Spider-Man. Before we cut the waffle though, click like, click subscribe, share the video with your gran, leave some words in the little square box because you have to do that for Uncle Algie, and let's do it. Since this model is 3D printed, I need to cure these parts before I can start working on them. This usually consists of me putting them into a machine that has a UV light in it, which hardens the resin. I then start working on the model and check that the fit is great. After I've got the fit working by sanding and cutting off edges, I will super glue parts that can be glued in. In this case, I glued quite a lot of this model together before I primed it. I primed this model with Citadel Black spray paint, and this is because black is the color I wanted to paint underneath everything. The reason that you need to use a primer is to help the next layers of paint adhere to the layers of paint that you're going to add later on. I then added a zenithal, which is a white basically, over the top of this model, and only added that on Spidey himself. I then sprayed the reds over the top of him and allowed him to dry while I worked on the base. On the base, I needed to make it look like it was smoky and rubbery, so I sprayed it with grey at first because smoke is grey. I then used white ink to go over the fire element, and I added that mostly from the top, but I kind of changed the color of this to be quite light. I then used the same white to go around and add some puff to the puff balls on the base. This is a technical term that is only used in the most experienced of painters' areas, and this is when you make puff look more puffy. Whilst the base was drying, it was a good time to come back with a shadow and spray that onto a Spider-Man, and then start working up some highlights. I used an orange at first, and I built my way up to a yellow as a highlight. If you look at any of the comics of the Amazing Spider-Man, they always highlight him with yellow. I don't know why they do this. It's magic, it looks nice, I like it, and I added it. And you can see what the effect looks like on this model. Now going back to the base, and the reason that I painted the base black at first, again because grey goes well over black. It's almost like that's the shadow of grey. And then also for this hover thing that he is gliding upon, which he has obviously stolen from a goblin looking man, it needed silver. If you just brush silver over the top, it looks magically like it's metal. Going back to the fire that's coming out of that flying thing, I sprayed
a see-through red over the top, or no, over the blacks first, and then I sprayed an orange, and I worked my way up to the lightest colors, being really careful to keep at least some of the whites for the yellows to go over the top of, and I sprayed a clear varnish shiny over the top of that. Working on the base, underneath the rubble, there is some rocks, and those rocks needed to look rock color. So I then proceeded to take a couple of rock colors and spray them on that base. And me being the super hyper efficient robot that I actually am, I then decided to paint some of the OSL for the glider because I needed the light to be shining. OSL is a shortened word for object source lighting. It's a very fancy word that people like to use when they explain light coming from a source and shining on other things. For this, I used white, and I used white to lay down the layers of where the greenest green would be, and then I sprayed a green over the top of that. I also sprayed a little bit of blue and a little bit of red at the bottom of the glider for some ambiance. I then used some blue to paint the blue parts of Spider-Man's suit. This is a one and done coat. I only need to do this with a brush, meaning I don't have to mask anything off. This happens to be my technique for painting Spider-Man, and I really like it this way. It's easy and quick and looks really freaking good. By the way, this blue is super thinned down. I need to buy more of this blue, but this bottle was finished. I just put water in it and I have more paint. It's like a magic secret trick. Don't tell anybody about it. Going back to the base, it was time to dry brush it. I let this dry for a while because I needed to dry brush it, and it needed to be dry when I dry brushed it. I used some washes to actually give a little bit of depth to the base and also to add a little bit more color, because when you dry brush with white, funnily enough, you kind of take away the color. And I sprayed a couple of different colors or tones on this base just to bring some life into it and make it look dirty, like dirty ground. And then for the final layer of dry brushing on these rocks, I'm going to use like a skin tone tan kind of color. And this is because if it's white, you're taking away color. I want to add some color, but I also want some very light edges. After I was done dry brushing the edges, I then added black over the little pipes and bits of rebar that are around the base. They're kind of scattered in a few places, and this is to set up for adding the silver over them later. By doing this, what I'm doing is giving a frame to the silver, so when I add the silver on it, it's going to almost frame the edges. Now, I don't know how much you should and shouldn't leave, but I've seen the pro people do this, and this is what I am doing. And before that had all dried, it was time to flip over the base and stick on a piece of paper with a little picture on it that nobody would ever see. I made a massive error here, and the error is I didn't paint it white. I've told you in previous videos, paint the base white before you put the sticker or you'll have a bad time. I had a bad time. Now getting back onto the smoke, I needed to add some rubble into the smoke, and this color is called dust. I felt like if I was going to paint the dust in between the clouds of smoke, dust was the only color I could possibly use. I very carefully mixed this with a little bit of gray, and I kind of blotched it all over the dusty bits. I then slowly worked my way up using stippling to create more dust upon the dust. I used that same dust color mixed with grays, and I painted the rocks that are exploding out of the firepiece that comes around the front of the base. And then it was time to add the light to the base. You can't have an object that is a source of a light without object source lighting hitting the rest of the objects. So starting off with the fire, I used a translucent orange, and I used reds, and I used all sorts of colors to pretty much make it look like the fire was glowing against the clouds that are coming out of the base. And once I was satisfied with that, it was time to work out where the light was going to hit coming out of the glider itself. So I placed it on the base and had a look where the light would kind of go to, and I sort of painted a bit. I put the glider back on again to check, and I painted a bit more. This you don't want to overdo. If you do too much here, then it's definitely going to show that you were trying to do something, and it doesn't need that much. Now it was time to actually attack the source of those lights. They needed to be lighter and brighter. So I mixed some of this fluorescent green with a bit of white, and I painted around the source of those lights. I also then used this color to edge highlight quite a few pieces on the glider itself. This is going to help differentiate the silhouette of the piece when you are looking at it from eye level. And for this statue, I decided to glue it together, and it's not going anywhere. This is our own personal piece. I'm super glad that CA 3D Sculpt sponsored essentially this to the video, because I really like Spider-Man, and so for me, I'm gonna keep him in my own shelf, and that's why I decided to glue him. Now let's get onto the lenses of this dude's face. I start out with the gray. You wanna go not too dark. If you go way too dark, it's gonna be too dark. But you wanna kinda go like almost off-white, and then slowly build your way up to white. If you keep the paint wet, you can wet blend this and get a really good looking result. As you can see, I'm doing separate layers and then kind of blending them in between with just fast motions of the brush. I then take white and I go around the edge just to give it a highlight all the way around the edge of each eye lens, and then I'll finish that off with painting a black around the outside of the eye lens, and that's pretty much the eyeballs, really. They're so easy. Honestly, I like painting Spider-Man's eyes. They're much easier than anyone else's eyes. Now it's time to tackle that suit that is only one color of blue. I added 2 layers to make sure it was true, and after that I used another blue. Basically, this is now Dr. Seuss channel. I used light blue and I just sprayed that through my airbrush really thin on a very low pressure, very carefully, trying not to hit any other parts, and it just built up some depth. I then painted the goblin bomb that is in the end of the whip piece of, what's that thing called? And it was time to now tackle the freaking lines. The only thing about Spider-Man is the lines. That's the only thing that really puts me off Spider-Man, is doing the lines. However, I was told by a certain Matt of Matt's custom models to use a brush pen, and I went and bought myself a brush pen, and thank you, Matt. That is the best thing that I've ever done in my life. I'm super happy about it. Go buy yourself a brush pen. I don't know which one, because this is the one I found in my store nearest to me. You need to find one and just use the brush pen. It's magic. It honestly, no more dipping, no more hoping that there's gonna still be paint, just freaking brush pen magic. Also, you might want to wear a glove for this, because when you're holding the model, you're probably going to be touching some of that black and it's going to go everywhere. And oh my god, that's the only thing. If you're not careful, you will get paint. And by paint, I mean ink from the new brush that you got all over the place. And you're going to be sad at one point. So it's probably a good idea to seal this in with a clear coat before you start. That way, you can wash, at least to some extent, some of the mistakes off. Don't say I didn't warn you. It is very possible that you're going to make mistakes. I made at least 7. When I was done with the lines on the suit, it was time for me to paint that lovely emblem on his back, which is a nice bright red. I then added some of that OSL to the underside of him, and that's where I called this model done. Hopefully you've taken something in this video that will help you paint your own Spider-Man in the future. And maybe you're not painting Spider-Man and you're painting something different. Maybe this will help you. I hope that I inspire many people to make many different things, because I like many things myself. Of course, this would not be possible if it weren't for my Patreons. And I'd like to say a super special thank you to my Patreons right meow. And there was a couple new Patrons I'd like to thank on top of that. Mark Pride and Cloudy Fep. Cloudy FEP. However you say it, thank you, my dudes. It's because of you guys that I'm able to keep that light blinding my eyeballs and continue making videos like this. Now we are at the best part of the video. This is when I get to tell you how I feel about things. And the way I feel is, if you didn't like anything you saw in this video, then kindly just fuck off. Now I've got a hover tank to make, so if you would please excuse me while I go and make this thing. Oh, you thought I was just gonna be quiet about Raslin standing in the back corner here? Yes, next time.
This is a 3D printer. This is a statue. This is ground affected. And this is what I made this week. You thought I forgot, didn't you? My name is your dad. And welcome to a grown man playing with dollies on the internet. And by dollies, what I mean is 3D printed models that are printed in my 3D printer and then painted to make them look very nice to put on a shelf. If you're new around here, I like to make models of all kinds. I make miniatures, I make statues, and I make remote control tanks sometimes that blow fire out of them. Video of that is coming soon. If you haven't seen my little meme video, go check that out now. There will be a link up. There was a link somewhere. While you're checking that out, you might want to leave some comments, which is the words that you will leave in the square box below that YouTube gives you to leave some words in. This does help somehow. I don't know how, but when you're leaving that comment, leave a like and a subscribe, share the video with your gran, and let's get into how I painted the April. Before we get into the video, I'd like to give a huge shout out to this video's sponsor, which is CA3D Studios. These guys are a Patreon that you subscribe to monthly and you receive multiple files. The last time I checked, they give out 6 files a month, which is freaking ridiculous, and really great sculpts that are amazing to look at and print. Also to paint if you like that kind of thing too. One of the greatest things about this Patreon is they really give thought to how the model is going to be painted. This is such an important thing, at least for me, when I'm choosing something I would like to paint, and for that reason, I give them a thumbs up. Now the model I'm painting in this video is part of their April releases. Of course, we are getting out of April now, and so if you would like to get this model, you would need to join up to this VIP plan, and when you've done that, make sure to send a message to them, tell them that you've come from this video so that you can get the April file if that's what you're looking for. Thank you so much to CA3D Studios for supporting the artists who create the content about the things that they make as well. And let's just get straight into painting this video. I don't know why I keep doing this. I actually think I'm finally going crazy. So it's no new news that I like to use a Chaos Black Citadel spray paint as my base layers for all my models. And that's what I used for this statue. I then took an ink and I sprayed that over the top of it. Now I'm doing a yellow suit, and in theory, using black as the undercoat is the worst idea that you could ever have. However, I'm hoping that this will come through later and show off the way that I wanted it to. I put the girl aside and I started working on all the features upon the base. And to start off with, I painted this little piece of papery thing. And I started by painting it off with a copper in color, and this is because I feel like it is copper in color. I then gave it a shadow with some burnt exhaust type colors, which also came from a different brand, as you could tell. And I sprayed a wash at the bottom just to tie everything together, and this is where I was pretty much done with the copper on this part. I painted white into the goop that is coming out of the pipe. This is because I want to paint this a different color later, and also because if I painted that color later, it wouldn't be bright enough. And now because I think I have something wrong with my brain, I'm going to start working on a different part of the model. And this is going to be the bricks that are laying on the base of this statue.
And I painted them with my favorite color of all time, red leather. Because who wouldn't want bricks that are made of leather color? And then, just to really confuse everything again, I worked on something completely different, and this is the actual base. And I sprayed a grey over everything just to give some kind of a gradient to that concrete that's on the floor. And then I used a panel line wash liner thing from Tamiya, and I pretty much put that in all the little cracks all about on the model. This was to create some depth, and I realized that I also made a big mess with this. So I came back with the dry brush later and used a lighter grey to kind of dry brush over the top of that and hide some of that mess. I incrementally worked my way up to a lighter color, namely white. And once that was done, I believe it was too white. So I went back with the non-oil wash and sprayed that in some of the areas to create some depth. While I was about that, I just used some of that to give some shadows to my bricks too. I then took some washes and painted select few bricks. Not all bricks, just a couple of them. And this is because not all bricks are the same color. And really, I probably should paint them all different colors, but I'm a little bit lazy, and so I just used the wash to tint some of them different colors. And while that wash was drying, it was time to go back and paint the goop that is coming out of my sewer pipe. And for this, I used a technical paint from Citadel, which went a little bit globularly. That is an actual word, look it up in the dictionary. Don't do that now, look after the video. But when the paint goes globularly, it's not good. In this case though, it's supposed to be goop, so it worked out fine. There is a sewer cap thing that she is standing upon, and this sewer cap needs to look like a sewer cap. So I painted it sewer cap bronze, which is an actual color, and then I gave that a bit of a wet blend with some darker. You saw what I did. You saw what happened. Don't worry about it. You just put bronze in the area and hope for the best. Now to get back to those bricks, I needed to kind of change the color of the concrete, because that couldn't be the same color as the brick, otherwise it would look weird. And so I used a sort of dusty color, which I thought was going to ruin this, but actually worked out really, really well. Really, really well. And this I just dabbed on. I didn't actually paint this. You don't want this actually to be too thick. You don't want it to cover all the cracks. You kind of want to leave some of the old paint in the crevasses, because this makes it look a little bit more realistic. I then went and masked off some of the areas on her boots, because her boots are white, so I added a bit more white in this area before I moved on to this step. Masking this off means that I'm going to be able to paint the rest of her suit without worrying about getting yellow on everything else. I then used Imperial Fist yellow, which is a very bright yellow, and I painted that over everything. Now what you will notice is that everywhere that was actually black, the yellow that goes over the top of that turns to an awful green. So in order to tint that, I'm going to use this powerful Iandin yellow and spray that from the bottom. This is going to tint that green to a slightly less darker green, but it's still going to be greenish. And once that dries, you will see that there is a tint over the top of that green. However, green is the color of shadow. And for this model, I wanted to have a lot of contrast just because I'm trying something and I thought it would look good. Now for the skin tones, I used the usual suspect of the skin tone paints that I would usually use. My light just went out. I've made many videos on how to paint skin tones. You can just look through my videos and find a lot of videos about how to paint skin tones, and almost in every video I paint someone's skin tones, so I'm not going to go over that now. Going on to this base, I'm going to dry brush a little bit of highlights with some silver over the top of those pieces of metallic things on the base. And while that all dries, I'm going to come back to the suit again, and this time I'm going to paint the zippers and some of the buttons with a dark silver to make them look kind of like metal, I guess. Now for the infamous picture that shall not ever be seen again after this, and that I use a 5-minute epoxy. I've said this in every video, and there's always a comment about what is it and how is it. It's 5-minute epoxy, my dudes, and all I do is I print this thing out on a piece of paper, I cut it roughly to the shape, I stick the epoxy all over this thing, and then I place the picture in it, and then I hold it down, try to press it nicely and make sure all the edges are done. Sometimes I have to burn off edges, sometimes I have to cut them off. There's a lot of things going on there, but if you would like to see a more in-depth video about this, you could join my Patreon, and there is a video where I specifically went over exactly how I make these things for the bottom of your base so that no one else can see them too. Once that was done, I then glued on the accessories for the base. I used super glue in this case. Because this model isn't going to be going anywhere, I didn't use any magnets. It's just glued together because it's going to go on my shelf and look very pretty in my studio. Now, getting back to the suit, I need to paint April's belt and also her sleeve cuffs as well. They are white. Now, really, what you probably could do if you were going to take this super far is mask those off, paint them white with an airbrush, and then give them a shadow and all the rest of it. But you can get away with just painting these solid white. And why you can do this is because everything else is shaded. These are such small pieces that no one's going to look at them, and if they do, I'm going to say please stand away from my model, you're getting way too close. For her hair, I painted them with red at first, and if you remember, I had a zenithal highlight on that, so there is a lot of black in them which creates the contrast. I then used an orange over the top of that red to create a bit more highlights over the top of that. Then using a Carabao Crimson, which is a shade and it's red in color, I sprayed that from the bottom to give a bit more depth to my blend over this hair. I then dry brushed some red leather over the top just to bring it into the brown area so it's not completely red, but it has a bit more natural look to it. I then used a lighter skin tone over the top, only on the highlights, just to bring out a couple of strands here and there. And now for some reason, apparently I painted all this skin in very weird ways, and maybe I was letting it dry, I don't even know, but this is where I was working up the rest of the highlights on the skin tones. I painted this model really quickly over a Sunday, and if you want to paint something like this, you could probably do one of these in a day too. It just takes a bit of knowledge on how to use certain parts of your workshop at certain times. So if you paint certain things and allow them to dry while you're painting other things, you can actually get quite a lot done in a very short amount of time. This is actually a skill that I have learned over the last few years of painting, and basically this is why everything looks so ADHD. It's just because I'm working on things as I'm working on other things, and this way I can make sure I get things done a lot quicker. Instead of taking a whole week to paint something like this, I can paint it in one day. Granted, it is a long day, but I can paint it in one day. Here we are working on the eyes, and I painted the base coats of black, and then a classic example of what I was just talking about, I painted then the microphone. I used the same white which I was using on the microphone to paint in the eyes and shape them up. And once I was happy with the shape, I then printed off some transfers for her eyes. Now some people will call this cheating, and I would say it probably is, but it doesn't really matter. Some people would say airbrush is cheating. At the end of the day, whatever works and it looks good for you, you do what you need to do, man. It's not anybody else's hobby, and when they throw shade at you, you just tell them to look at the end of my video. There's instructions for them that they can just follow. This is where the eyes were done, and I added a highlight to those eyes as well as painted in her teeth. I then used a little bit of a reddish tint into some skin tones, and I painted over her lips to give them a lipstickish kind of look. I also used gloss over her eyes and gloss over her lips and teeth as well, so that they looked a little bit wet. And that is pretty much where I called this model done.
Now, of course, I hope you got something out of this video that will help you paint and print your own model in the future. Perhaps you're making April yourself, and if you do, maybe you want to tag me in Instagram and share it in the socials with the tag. You know what I mean. Just tag me so I can see what you've made. It would be great to see. We are now at the part where I need to thank my Patreon, because without Patreon I wouldn't be able to keep making these videos, and these lights wouldn't make my eyes blind. I shouldn't have looked at that one, because I am now officially seeing 1,000,000 lights. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to thank the new patrons we got in the last couple of weeks. John Doe, Christian Pinti, Catoliba, Christoph Ruby, and Massimo de Agostino. Thank you, my dudes. Because of you, I'm able to keep lunch on my table, lights blinding my eyeballs, and models being made every single day. Of course, if you would like to see more of these kind of videos, make sure to leave a like and to click the subscribe. You've already shared it with your gram, because I know you did it in the beginning. This is when I get to tell you that if you didn't like anything you saw in this video, I don't really care. Just click the dislike button and then off. Now I'm gonna go and make some more static plastic models move, just because I can. This is Ground Affected. My name is your dad, and today I'm going to be painting Lara Croft from Abe 3D. I'm pretty sure that's who it is. But before we get into it, oh yes, I recorded this all in the completely wrong order. So let's just rewind this situation and tell you how I got to this point. So you may have noticed I got a little bit ahead of myself, recording stuff before I've even done my intro. And yes, I completely forgot that how to make videos, but I'm doing it now, so let's just get into it. I used obviously a black primer because that's what I do with everything, whether you like it or not. I then took a very nice green from Emma by Mig and sprayed that over the plant. It just one and done. That's pretty much it for the plant, and then moved on to all the leathers. This I used a brown from Emma by Mig and sprayed that over everything, lightening it up as much as I can to the highest parts, and then I put in a little bit of a dark wash into the shadows. Now for this base, it's pretty simple really. I'm just going to give it a zenithal highlight, but with a dry brush. Now don't let the words dry brush fool you too much, because it shouldn't be the driest brush that you have. You actually want a slightly damp brush in order to do dry brushing without leaving a powdery, horrible substance all over your models. And now that I've got the volume and the value that I want in this piece of rock, I'm then going to spray a blue wash into the shadows to make it not look completely white and black, because that's very boring. I then take Cygor brown and paint that over every single root that is on the base, because roots are brown, I think. I also am going to use a lighter brown to just highlight a couple of spots on the high parts of that. I then am going to try some of this dirty down moss stuff. I have no idea how to use this stuff, so I just painted it on all the moss looking stuff. And now that you know how I got to this point, it's probably time for us to continue from this point thus further. The next thing that I'm going to need to do is cover up this base so that I can get a zenithal volumetric highlight on this lady, so that I can get the skin tones right. Another thing I want to quickly mention, that the original printer of this model was not actually me, and they gave me these glasses in a solid resin, which is no good. So I printed it in clear. Yes, it looks a little bit maybe not so clear at this point, but don't worry about that, because this is because I've already polished them, because I need to paint them as something like that. Although I was not very happy with how that came out, and so that's why I printed another one, and I'm gonna try to repair the situation with that. And as I said leading up to this moment, I'm going to now zenithal highlight this lady, and I'm going to do that using a white ink, and I'm going to just spray that mostly from the top, but I'm also going to use my mind to pick out some volumes on the model. This is not too difficult, and for all skin painting really, I use the same technique. At least for now, this is a technique that I stumbled upon, and I really like this technique to paint skin tones. If you are still struggling with skin tones, then you should check out some of my videos that I have made in the past about painting skin tones. Once I'm done with all the setup of the underneath painting of the skin tones, it's time to start painting the highlights. And by highlights, what I really mean is actually the skin tones itself. I really don't need to explain this again in this particular video because I have done a lot of videos about painting skin tones, so I'm going to brush over most of this really quickly so that we can get to the good juicy bits. Once I've done some glorious highlights on the model and made sure that everything looks vaguely like it is supposed to look, I'm then going to add, obviously, the magical orcish flesh, whatever the dermis, that color is going to go into all the shadowed areas. And now I still haven't figured out a replacement for that color, but believe me, I'm working on it, and when I do figure it out, I will make sure to let you all know what that replacement color it could be for those who can't find it. I'm now going to spray a couple of speckles all over the skin. If you look very carefully, hopefully the quality of the video is good enough that you can see she looks like I've splashed a whole load of fly poo on her. And now the problem is that's going to stand out like a sore thumb, but we will come back and deal with that later. But before that, I'm going to spray the brown that I need on her boots, and I'm going to use the same color as her boots on her hair because her hair is also brown too. I'm then going to give that a highlight. I'm going to take Red Leather by Ammo by Mig, and I'm going to spray that over the tops highlighted areas of the parts of the brown that I've just laid down. The hair, however, is going to need something more than just the red leather, otherwise it's going to look like her hair was made out of the same material that her boots were made of. And something that many people might not know is that you can actually use skin tones that we use for painting skin tones to paint browns as well. What you may have noticed that I was talking a load of nonsense over was that I also used that transparent red to spray the glasses. Coming back to the rest of the model, however, I'm going to take some Cygor brown and paint some areas on the parts of brown that I had already painted before. And this is going to make it not look so boring, because if it's just one brown color, it's just going to look terrible. So I decided to add some darker areas, particularly on the bag, and this is going to make it look like there was different materials used to make up these parts on the bag. I took a dark silver and I painted all the buckles and the straps, clip things on the bag with that color. I also used bronze and I painted the emblem thing in the middle of the bag. Now it's time to deal with that shirt. This was a difficult color at first, and I looked at all my colors not knowing what to do until it stood out like a sore thumb at me. And the easiest thing was that Army Painter had already made exactly the color for Lara Croft's shirt. I then used some browns to paint her pants, because her pants are also brown. But if you may notice that I'm not using the same brown that I painted her boots with, because things would start to get a little bit muddy. And now that the base coat on the shirt is dry, I can come back over it with a little wash into the shadows of it. And the reason that I would do this at this stage is because it's just going to make so much more sense to have some shadows on the t-shirt, but at the same time, this particular blue is not going to actually change too much if it hits the skin. I need to be a lot more careful later, however, when I start to do the highlights. I can now also paint the rest of the straps that are on this torso piece on the model. I'm going to use a brighter brown, and I'm also going to paint the inner piece of the strap again to separate the two types of materials so that it doesn't look boring. I'm going to use a black Templar contrast paint to paint her necklace, or at least the strap that's around her neck, and then a really bright green to paint the little thing that is hanging around her neck. I thought that skeleton horde would be a good color to paint the bandages on her arm. I was very wrong, however, and I reverted back to an old friend, Deck Tan, and I just pretty much painted that back over the top of that skeleton horde. However, it is going to show a little bit through because I watered this paint down quite a bit. And then I took Cygor brown and painted gloves, because this I felt like could be a very similar color to what her straps on her legs and her boots are made out of. I also used that black Templar contrast paint on her guns as well, because it seems to settle quite nicely and look really good as a metallic kind of black metal color. Is sort of, I think it does anyway. I then took Cygor brown and painted the straps that are holding the gats to the side of her legs. Now, something I've been experimenting a little bit with is a bit of makeup, and for that I use Gryph-hound Charge Grey, very much watered down to almost water, and I spray that in multiple layers over the eyeshadowed areas of the eyeballs. I also take a very bright magenta and spray that onto her cheeks as if it were some form of a blush. Then I paint her eyebrows, which are technically just caterpillars on the top of her forehead, and then paint her lips using Magos Purple. Those who play the deck tan game will now rejoice in the fact that I'm using deck tan to paint that little sock sticking out of her boot. But after that, I'm going to use a Cygor Brown to paint the edging on her boots. I'm then also going to take a dark wash and I'm going to paint over the straps and also into the little gaps of that alternate type of leather, just to make it look separate from each other's material. At the end of the day, all I'm trying to do is make sure that the materials aren't just one simple color all the way through, because this is boring to look at and won't make for a very good model. I came back to the rest of the satchels on the model and painted those as well at this point. I also used again a metallic dark silver to paint the straps and the buckles and all the other little bits that are around the straps on her legs. I painted her eyelashes with a black, and then I used a pink to paint the insides of her eyes before coming back with a deck tan and painting the whites, or as some people like me to say, the sclera of her eyes. Her irises are Cygor Brown as a first layer, and they are highlighted with Leather Brown from Vallejo. Once I've got the irises in place, I put in a small black dot for the pupil, and I add a little white highlight, and I paint a gloss paint over those. Don't forget to gloss the lips as well. And now for the brim of the glasses, I'm going to use this rough iron color. It was the most closest color to what I thought that these glasses should have on the frame. I then used some epoxy to glue the hair onto this model. And I'm not gonna lie, but this was a terrifying point for me, because as you will notice, that mixing the epoxy is not very difficult, but sticking the hair onto this head as well as getting it somehow onto the torso is extremely difficult. It was so difficult. This is the reason why I chose to glue these parts together, because you are not realistically taking these parts off ever without scratching the paint in some way, shape or form. And once I had cleared my underpants and got that hair down, I felt a lot more of a relief. And I decided that it was time to finish off this model by blasting the silver on the tops of her gats. And then when I've done getting the silver in the right place, I'm going to use a panel line wash, and I'm going to run that all over the gats to make them look a little bit shiny again. And once I'm done with this section of the model, I can put it together and pretty much call this model done. You may have noticed that my voice was definitely struggling in this video a little bit, and hopefully I'll be a lot more fresher for the next video. If you did not enjoy anything you saw in this video, then I'm going to leave you some words to live by at the end of this video. But before I do that, I would like to say a super special thank you to my patrons, because without them, this video wouldn't have been possible at all. This video was not sponsored by anybody other than my patrons, and for that I want to say a special thank you to them right now. And now I can tell you what to do if you didn't like anything you saw in this video, and it's pretty simple really. Just stick yourself in your own pockets and f*** off.
This is ground affected. My name is your dad, and I 3D print and paint models just like these over a year and okay, I'll be totally honest. I try to do this whole thing where I explain who I am and what I do, but I don't care. This is the current situation. I am curing these little bits that I need for the model I'm going to be painting. And that model is actually in bits on my table because I am preparing it to get its paint. And that draws me to the next conclusion. And the conclusion is that this is the model that we are painting. This is Cruella de Vil, sculpted by MCM, my custom model 3Ds, who is obviously this week's video sponsor. Thank you to them for sponsoring us. And let's just get straight into painting the model. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I made mine smaller. The way he sculpted it is quarter scale. I made mine 60% of this. Which is close enough to be in 1/6 scale. However, it's a little bit smaller, but this means that I have very small things. So I'm going to try not to lose these things during this process, and if they go missing, well, then they'll be missing, obviously. See what I mean? It's already gone. You can't even see it on the table. Other than a little bit of gap filling, I think we are almost ready to start priming this model. I'm going to do all the prep work that I need to do, and we'll just come back to this video when it's ready for the paint. Oh, I just, on the subject of prepping things, I got these things from I got these things which are actually just loads of different pieces of sandpaper. They call it a sanding sponge, but they lied. It is sandpaper attached to a sponge. It's still very useful though. I got these in stock in my shop. You have to come into the shop to get it, so there's that. I'm going to start out with the zenithal on this model. This is a white ink, and I'm going to be using a little bit of this pure alcohol. This is 99% alcohol. This is to thin my ink, and I have put the model together because it makes the most sense to do the zenithal in the position that the model is going to be. Now, the zenithal doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a zenithal. You can put this light source wherever you want. It's just a general term people use, and by people I mean myself, when I'm putting white over the top of black. In most cases, it's going to be light coming from the top and shadows coming from the bottom. That's going to be this case as well. What we're looking for here is very clearly to see the light source. As you can see, I have chosen where my light source is coming from. That is literally all that the white is for. This is to lighten up the areas and keep shadows in the areas that we want to be shadowed, obviously. Usually this is also the part in the video where I add a little bit extra, and that is because most people's attention spans can't last past 3 squirts. And now that I have the highlights and shadows set up for my model, I can start working on laying down the world famous pinkle. This is the color that is between pink and purple, but basically this is the undertones for skin tones. Now in this model I'm going to attempt something a little bit different. Don't even ask me why, because I myself don't know, other than I just try things sometimes and it seemed to work out okay. So if you wanted another way of painting skin tones, this is another way of painting the same skin tones, basically. Also, by the way, I use this sunny skin tone. I personally don't like this color, so I am going to switch this up later and use basic skin tone instead. However, take note that adding layers of color like this, it does add to the look of the skin tones. Those were layered up quite a bit, so I'm going to leave them to dry, and while they dry, I'm going to paint the bag that is going on the base with just red, and when I'm done with that, I will spray a Carabao Crimson into the shadows to create some shadows, as one does. When that is dry enough, I used my wife's hairdryer to speeden that up. I then used a gloss clear coat over the top to make it look shiny. I then took some Corax white and painted that on the base. I wanted the base to appear like a very nice off-white, but at the same time I didn't want it to be completely white, so I used some Griff Charger Grey and sprayed that onto the bottom part of the base and in the crevasse around the center. And as you can see, there is a nice gradient making my base a little bit less boring. Now I'm going to use some Orcish Dermis to spray in the bendy parts of the skin. This is one of the colors that I use to help bring the life back into the skin, because most skin tones are actually really desaturated and it drives me nuts. As you may notice, I was pointing at my airbrush. That is because I literally just added a little bit of white ink into that later skin tone that I used just to create another layer between layers. And then I'm going to use a highlight skin color, which is a very bright color, just to highlight the brightest spots on the skin. For the stockings, I'm going to take Brown Rose, which was found actually in the skin tone section of the Vallejo model stuff, anyway, and I painted that just with the airbrush and a very thin layer over the highlight areas of the stockings. I then came back with some Black Templar from the shadowed areas to make sure I caught underneath the knee and some of the other areas like below the calf and stuff like that. As you can see, this gives like a grayish look to the stockings, and in hindsight I would have maybe done 2 more layers of this, but I accepted this gray look, and if you were painting a model like this, you could accept the gray look and it would look just fine. So moving on, I'm going to start painting the shoes, and at first I'm going to use Deck Tan to paint just that little small piece that is on the inside of the tongue view of her shoe. And then I'm going to use red over the top of that. The Deck Tan first was just so that my red was so much brighter. I'm then going to take some black and paint the shoes black fully. When they are completely dry, I'm going to use a gloss over the top of them and make sure that they look nice and shiny. Now that all that playing is over and done with, I can start working on the bag that is going on the base, and I'm going to paint these straps with a silver. But before I do that, I want to set it up with black, and the reason for this is because I'm probably going to miss some stuff, and actually I'm purposefully going to miss some stuff because having the black in the shadows helps to create some depth in the silver. It also helps hide some weird mistakes. The black I find is actually easier to cover than what the silver is, but black is always a really good base coat for colors like silver because you can leave it in the crevasses to create some shadows. Now once that's all done, I can start working on the dress that Cruella herself is wearing, and for this I'm going to use the same color that I used to paint her bag, and the main reason for this is because this color has got a very good coverage, but it is also extremely bright, and this is exactly what I want. Now I'm going to want to add some shadows to this, and this is going to be kind of difficult without masking, but because I'm taking Grimoire Purple, which is almost a good enough color to put a shadow on the skin tones as well, I'm going to make sure that all the skin parts are together while I spray this in the shadows, giving me some shadows without having any overspray. But there is overspray, it just actually looks like it's meant to be there. You can't even tell, actually. Let's not talk about it, and let's just move on to painting the necklace. And the necklace is just painted black. It's pretty simple, really. A black with a silver spot on the little metal piece in the front. I have no words for what even these things are. But the words that I do have are ones for how I painted the gems on her hands, and that was with silver first for the rings themselves, with a little bit of Deck Tan over the jewel, and then using this Tesseract Glow, I painted the jewels and gave them a gloss clear coat as well. So I am calling it done for the day. That is just because it's getting late. I've painted this much. All I have to do is her face and her coat. Don't worry about that. Which needs to have some spots because of the Dalmatians. And speaking of spots, this is a good spot to explain to you the sponsor of this week's video. This is My Custom Models, and you can join them over on Patreon. This is actually the model from this week's video. Of course, these are part of, I think, last month's collections, but these models are all available every single month, different models, not these exact ones. Man, I'm ruining this one. I mean, I think you get it by now. This video was sponsored by MCM 3D. You should go check them out. There's a link for them in the description. They're the ones who sculpted the video model, the model in the video. Words are so hard. Just go freaking join their Patreon now. Thank you, MCM, for sponsoring this video. Now I'm going to quickly work on the hair of this model, as I am now going to start completing the model. And for the hair, I used a bit of skeleton horde just from the shadows. On the highlights of the black, this time I chose to use a green color. And this is because I don't really actually have an answer for that, other than I just knew that it wouldn't be green when I put it over the top. It would have a tint, a hue, it would make the hair look a little bit lighter. It's a thing. Try it. It's blue or green, one of those two. Yellow also works, by the way, but we're getting so far off topic. If you may have noticed, I sprayed a little bit of a grey shade into the shadows of the coat. And when I was done with that, I took some black and painted the spots all over the coat. These are just, doesn't really matter how you paint them, to be honest. I just literally painted spots and didn't try very hard to make them very perfect, because they wouldn't be perfect anyway. I then took that same grey and painted that into the crevasses around the ridge of the coat. This is a very, very fine line, and it helps to separate the seams and just helps to make it look like you put more attention into the model. I can then put these parts together. Now, this was a slightly stressful bit, and I did have to pay a little bit of attention to the fitting of the seam. And there is still a seam, but we won't talk about it, it's not that bad. Taking some Griff Charger Grey, I'm going to spray that on a very low air pressure just into the eye sockets to kind of simulate some form of makeup. Now, I'm a very unsophisticated man, and I don't understand how makeup and things like this work, so bear with me when it comes to this kind of stuff. What I do know, though, is that you need to paint the caterpillars on top of her eyes, otherwise it's going to look awkward, and yes, that is a difficult part. Just do it. Don't worry about it. Just do it. I also painted her lips with a very bright red. This is because she has bright red lipsticks, obviously to match her bright red dress, I would assume. Then I painted the black into her eyes, and this particular character has a very hard eyeliner look, so I made sure that this time those eyes had eyeliner all the way around. Before I came back and painted a little bit of a highlight onto her coat. This is on just the edges using a dry brush, and this helps to just create a bit more depth. Now that the black in her eyes is dried properly, I can come in with some brighter color. In this case, I use a highlight skin, which is kind of white, but it's definitely not white, because white would look really weird if you painted it here. If you don't have this, you could mix a little bit of brown into your white just to get a slight off white, and then paint the eyes very carefully into the shapes that I want. When you're done with that, then you can paint the eyeballs, the inside of the eyeballs. I can't even remember the words for these things. The colored part that is round, you paint it with the darker color, then the lighter color. Her eyes are green, so I painted a dark blue, and then I painted a green on the inside, giving a slight blue rim around the edge of that green eye color. I then painted a black dot for the pupil and a white specular highlight, very carefully using this gloss color to paint over her lips and eyes, because this gloss color will ruin everything if you are not careful. And I then glued her hair pieces together, trying my best to make sure they were as straight as possible. I stuck that head on top of the model and called this one done. Now, this is the 4th time that I've recorded this outro section, so if the words don't work this time, you're getting the porridge that comes out. I cannot do it over and over again, because apparently my mouth will not cooperate with my brain. If you have enjoyed this video, I would appreciate greatly if you click the like button. However, if you click the share button and shared it upon any of your social channels, any of your medias of socials, or just shared it with your gran. Specifically, I hope that you share it with your gran, and after that, you will then maybe click the subscribe button, because you haven't done that yet. Then great. Now we can move on to the other people that watch this video, and those are my Patreons, because I need to thank those people, because without them, the lights wouldn't blind my eyeballs, and I couldn't keep doing this, whatever the heck this thing is I'm calling as a job. So thank you to those guys for helping me keeping this going. And if you're interested in just the little bits and pieces that I post up, that are spare content, that will be over on the Patreon. So maybe you want to check it out. I don't know. I don't care. And if you didn't like anything you saw in this video, that is one thing that I also don't care about. And now you should probably fuck off. Oh, by the way, since I have started messing a little bit around with the metalworking, I figured I would try to make a themed piece of jewelry for this model. And I might use this as something I might keep doing going forward, but I'm not 100% sure about this. So I thought I would just show you what I made. And this is a Cruella de Vil themed ring that I have made out of a 925 sterling silver, in which I have wrapped around all sorts of things and mounted a couple of cubic zirconias and one garnet. And also I think the other things are called spinels. I don't actually know what the heck I'm doing. However, this is the thing I have made, and it is a size M. If you're interested in buying this thing, by the way, hit me up in the DMs, send me an email, whatever. I don't care how you reach out. If you want it, then reach out. Tell your mum I said hi.
This is Ground Affected. My name is your dad, and today I am painting this lady from Tanuki Figures. Yes, that means this video was sponsored by Tanuki Figures. A little bit more about them later. Now, I'm going to be totally honest, I actually have no idea who this character is, but I'm still going to be able to paint it even if I don't know who it is. And I'm going to start out with this base, which is, I'm gonna be honest, looking very, very colorful. Also, I just want to actually mention that I have done a zenithal, but this time I've really pretty much left the whole back of the model almost pretty much black in complete shadow. And I'm gonna see how this translates in large stature scale thing, because this is actually a miniature painting thing whereby you force the light. So I'm going to force the light on this model and see what it comes out like. Also, I'm filming this with an actual camera, so things might be a little bit weird while I get used to using a camera, a real one. And so, as I said in the beginning of the video, we're going to be using some miniature painting techniques to paint this model, namely just the light source thing. And I obviously start off with a layer of pinkle over that light source that I laid down, being very careful not to put any of that pinkle onto the black areas, because I want to spray red onto the black areas, and the blend between the two is fantastic. Now I'm going to take some burnt flesh, and I'm going to use 50% water and 50% paint and spray that through my airbrush, basically almost over everything. I'm still going to leave some shadows in there, and then I'm going to take some base flesh and spray that in the same manner. However, as you can tell, I'm having a slight issue with my airbrush. This is because the water in my area is a little bit hard, and I'm pretty sure this is leading to drying in the nozzle a little bit quicker than it necessarily needs to. Now, moving swiftly on, I'm going to dry the model before I move on to using some sunny skin tone. Now, this layer is going to go much over all the highlights, and I'm pretty much going to try and avoid putting that at all into the shadowed areas. Next, I'm going to take Orcish Domus, and this one I thin quite a bit, probably around 60 to 70% water, and the rest is paint. I'm going to spray that into the shadows, as well as into the underparts and bendy parts of her body. Next, I'm going to take some rosy flesh. The same thing here, I'm thinning this down around 60% water, and I'm going to spray that over everything. Now, moving on to basic skin tone, I'm going to use this more direct into just the highlighted areas, and I'm going to add a bit of white ink into this, and I'm going to force the highlights just a little bit more. Notice that I did not move off from the highlighted areas of the model. Now I'm going to take some Gilliman flesh and spray that into the shadows. This will bring some much needed color back into those desaturated skin tones. Now going into the shadows with some Caribou Crimson, because this is a deep red, it's quite dark, it's going to help bring back some of the pink, but it's also going to add a lot more shadow into the shadowed areas. You can already see how the one arm is a little bit redder than the rest, and this helps to push it back into the shadows. Brightland Flesh Shade comes back in over the top of all of that and just seals the deal. Now I need to tan her skin a little bit more, and strangely enough, adding yellow as a very slight tint over the top of the surface helps to tan the skin. Now I can put that aside while I work on the base. And for the base, what I'm going to do is take a neutral grey and I'm going to just dry brush that over, yes, already the skin tones that are left on the base. This is going to leave a natural colour in between the crevasses of the rocks and just help with this naturally colourful base. This base, to be honest, has got a lot of colours in it, so we're gonna have to think really carefully how we do this. Now, the first thing I'm gonna do is go back over that natural grey and deck tan layer that I had put down with some tints, because I want to change the color of that surface, and putting down the grey and the deck tan was only just to bring out the textures. So I'm now able to come back in with some contrast paints in my airbrush, and if I'm careful enough and don't overspray too much, I can just pretty much tint the colors of everything that is around the base, as you can see I'm doing right now. Now for the grasses and the greenery that is on this base, I'm going to need quite a lot of greens, I'm going to be totally honest. But before I get to that, I'm going to add Skeleton Horde over some of the rocks to give them a yellowy tint. I came back with a little bit of a deck tan again to dry brush some of the edges and make them a bit brighter, but I really need some more greens and I just don't have them. So I'm going to go down to my rack and get them. I have selected a variety of greens to go with the greens that I currently have, ranging from some bluey kind of greens to some dark desaturated greens and some really bright greens with quite a load of yellow in them. And I'm going to end up painting every single blade and leaf that there is on this base with one of those greens, and I'm going to mix them as I go, but there is no real reason for why I've chosen any specific green for any specific area. Perhaps maybe in my brain somewhere it told me that I should put the brighter ones towards the front, but realistically I didn't think along those lines. I just painted them green where they needed to be green, using a red to paint the ends of the reeds, because for some reason these reeds are red in the image renders. That's what I did. I'm now going to take some desert yellow and I'm going to paint the top portion of the tree trunk. This is because in the render, when I look back, I found that I had not painted this part lighter. I also used that same color to paint all of the shrooms that are on and around this base. Now I'm going to take some purple, which is essentially the same color as Pinkle, so it's basically not purple, and I'm going to paint the lotuses inside of the pond, and I'm going to use some orange on the other flowers that are on the outside of the pond. And then I'm going to put the model back onto its base so that I can use some Caribou Crimson and spray that once again, using the model as my guide for where the lights are. I'm going to spray that reddish tint over everything that is in the shadowed area of this model. And yes, that is going to ruin all of those colors. However, once it dries, it's going to create a nice depth and help to give us that illusion that the depth is there. And while that sets aside to dry, I can start working on the rest of the model and the details that are on the model. I took some browns in the form of Cygor brown for her stockings and leather brown for her hair, and then some red leather, which is also a brownie kind of color. I'm going to paint the leather pieces. I don't really know how to describe some of the bits that we're going to come across in this model, but I'll be totally honest, you just need a bunch of browns in order to paint them. There are a lot of this furry stuff on the model, and for that I'm going to use deck tan, obviously, and for those red leather areas I'm going to take some Raglan Flesh Shade and spray that into the shadows of those areas. I'm then going to use a different brown, which in this case is a chestnut brown, to paint the hide piece that is pretty much covering the bobs. And I'm going to turn my airbrush down and carefully spray Agrax Earthshade into the shadows of that. This video was sponsored by Tanuki Figures. This is a Patreon over on Patreon where you will get a monthly access to STL files to 3D print and paint your own figures. In one of their months, you usually would get 3 premium full-size figures, 3 busts, a chibi, 1 extra and a toon, as well as the 6 models in the welcome pack. It's a pretty damn good deal. Check out the description for a link to Tanuki Figures, and by the way, if you use the code GROUND, you will get a 50% off the model from this video in their Patreon. Go check it out right now, and thank you to Tanuki Figures for sponsoring this video. Now I can get back to adding the details and complete painting all of the fur, or whatever you call. I don't know what you're calling this stuff, but it is a very difficult thing to paint, particularly because when you thin down deck tan, it does like to splatter a little bit, and if you get any splatters, you're going to have a bad time, because for some reason deck tan doesn't like to be rubbed off with water. Moving swiftly on, I'm going to paint all the little details on those leather pieces, the laces that tie it up, which are green and red, and I painted those as carefully as I possibly could. Then taking some Cygor brown, I painted her nails on her feet. And taking some Monument Hobbies bronze, I can then paint over the cuffs on her arms, which are meant to be golden in color. Now I'm going to use red leather again to paint her skirt leather, because in my mind this is probably the same material, and to be fair, looking at the renders, it pretty much looks like it's the same material. Now for a really difficult part on this, I'm going to use a dark brown, and I'm going to carefully use the side of my brush, and I'm going to paint over that fishnet stocking that is on her legs. I'll be totally honest with you, I did this twice, and that is because I painted it with Cygor brown, and that is way too thin of a paint to use. You need something that is dry, definitely not any kind of contrast paint. I then pretty much fixed it up and came back and did it again with the darker paint that is a little bit more dry, and then worked on some of the shadows on that dress, and I sprayed that in using my airbrush and came back in over the top of that and painted all of the fluffy furry stuff, and then all the trimming stuff. I also used bronze over the cuffs on her hands, which are actually bracelets and not cuffs, so I have no idea why I called them cuffs, but if you ignore that part and move on to a little bit more of the furry stuff on her arms. And to add depth to that, by the way, what I did was sprayed a skeleton horde with my airbrush on a low setting so that I could get it in carefully without getting it absolutely everywhere. Now carefully using brush control, I'm going to paint red over the necklace things, and you may notice that I didn't paint white down first, and there is a very good reason for this, and that is because we want all of that depth from the shadows to just ruin the red, because it forces it into shadow and makes it look like it has the shadow that we're trying to create. And now with that done, I can start working on other details on the model, like for example the handle of her spear. And for this, I just dry brushed this with a little bit of deck tan, and then I painted in some of that snakebite leather into the crevasses to make it not look so weird. I used some orange on the edges of the feathers, and then I used deck tan to paint the teeth on there. I also took some of that orange and painted it with my brush. I should have maybe mentioned earlier that the original orange I sprayed on using my airbrush on a low pressure. I then gave the same treatment to those teeth that I would to all teeth, which is to paint the skeleton horde with the airbrush from the bottom, and then I dry brushed some silver over the sharp pointy part of the spear. I then used the reds and greens to paint the threads, and I took some of that cycle brown to paint back her nails, this time on her hand. Now taking some Caribou Crimson with the whole model together, I can spray that over some of the details that never got it earlier. This is going to reinforce what was there before, and also to put that over the parts that I had added later. Now using Deck Tan, very very thin, like literally probably 5% paint to 95% water, I'm going to hand paint the markings that are on her body. These are quite difficult to do, I'm not going to lie, but by using a tapping motion with